What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the show, Vintage and Stuff, with your man, Drew Heifetz. We have Kelsey, Orbital Outdoors, on the show today. Super excited for this one. She is a outdoor enthusiast, a dealer of vintage outdoor clothing, specifically mostly Patagonia. And we get into some great topics on the show. We get into her life in vintage. We get into her experience as a child, getting taken away to one of these insane wilderness school camps. And we talk about that. We talk about the history of climbing as a whole. We talk about what makes Patagonia so desirable to vintage enthusiasts worldwide. It is a really good episode, and I enjoyed having this conversation. Sorry about last week lapse in the podcast, but we are back on a regular schedule. Needed some time away, a mental health break with my kids. I went surfing in Washington State, a week camping, pretty much a week off grid, which was really, really, really dope. I recommend all of you guys take a week off and go off grid, or even for a day, go off grid, get off your goddamn phones. But do it after you listen to this podcast. So this is the free 45-minute version of the show. If you want the full 2-hour episode, you got to jump on the Patreon or subscribe right here. Join the YouTube channel. Link down below for the Patreon. You get a free 7-day trial when you join. Then it's only $5 a month, everybody. It's only $5 a month. But you get your free trial, so you can listen to this episode for free. Link down below in the show notes for the Patreon. Don't be scared. Sign up. There you go. Things that we talk about on the paid version are my crazy theory that Patagonia was founded by drug money. Okay, if you want to learn about how Patagonia was potentially founded by drug money, you got to jump on the Patreon. We also talk about all kinds of other great topics, deep dive into some Patagonia gear, some Patagonia price guide stuff. So that's all in the paid version. Link down below in the show notes for the Patreon. But without further ado, let's just get into this great episode with Kelsey, Orbital Outdoors. Kelsey Silverstein, thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me as well. I'm excited to chat. Well, a lot of topics I want to cover on this show today. You know, you are an avid outdoor enthusiast. You are a vintage dealer of outdoor specific clothing. You obviously seems like you live the lifestyle as well. You know, I want to talk about your sort of history. We want to talk about Patagonia. I want to talk about your experiences, like how you got into the business, but also, you know, you've mentioned that when you were a kid, got sent away to one of these wilderness camps. I kind of want to talk about that. I think this is very interesting. So yeah, welcome. Stoked to have you.
I'm excited to get into that.
Awesome. So why don't we just kick it off? Sort of give us the rundown of how you got into this crazy world of selling vintage clothing in the beginning.
Yeah, so I started my business officially about 4 years ago, but I actually started reselling outdoor clothing about a decade ago when I was on a 9-month road trip with my partner at the time. And we had been doing the bike taxi stuff. So it's like any service industry job, like you can work extra hard, extra hours and stack a bunch of cash. And we bought a van and just hit the road for a climbing themed road trip around the country. And to
Nice.
have some supplemental income, we started in Denver, and that was the first time we ever heard of the Goodwill outlets. So it's pretty common there that people will fly out there and buy all their ski gear for the ski season. And then when they're done, they just donate all of it and go home because they don't think they'll need it again. So we would
Wow,
go
I've
there.
never heard that. That what a luxury
Yeah.
of the rich, right?
I've heard of people who get jobs in housekeeping in certain like luxury resorts because especially like European tourists where it's expensive to fly back with all the gear, they'll just leave it in the hotel room. And so
Wow.
they'll take that and resell it. So I would ride my bike actually about 10 miles from the house we were crashing at on our rest days from climbing and go to the Goodwill outlet and get like Burton ski coats and anything I could fit in my bag. And then I would bike home and list it on eBay and store it in that friend's garage when we went out climbing for 3 days. And then on our 3 days off, I would do packages and ship it out. And then when
Sweet.
we left Denver a couple months later, so we were living full time out of the van, it was a little harder to have the space to do that. But I still kind of did it off and on. I found some good stuff in like New Mexico and California. Just had to be more selective.
Nice. How did you get put onto the bins in Denver?
I honestly don't know. I wasn't like, I always say that like I've always had the morals behind being like eco-conscious and like I've been pescatarian for most of my life and I went vegan about a decade ago because I
Okay.
realized I shared all those morals. I just didn't have the education. So I feel like getting into secondhand clothing was sort of a big part of that. Like I always wanted to do good to the world and try to live a more like minimalist lifestyle with minimal impact on the environment. And once I actually started kind of like educating myself on all of that, I realized that like I don't know. I mean, I've come a long way in the last decade, but now if I buy something new, I feel like super guilty. So
Yeah.
it's been a process.
Well, lucky for us, we don't have to buy much new, really. So,
Yeah, it's very rare.
but in that beginning, like going to the Denver bins, you found the bins. Was there many people there picking? Kind of like was it heavy competition there?
No, I think I also didn't know how they worked. Like, I didn't know about the rotations and that people would just wait around for the new stuff to come out. I usually went in the
Yeah.
evening because it was less sunny and cooler to ride my bike. And I think I pretty much just went through the stuff that was already picked through, um, which I even still find today sometimes. I go to the bins and people like, I don't, they just go so fast. I think they miss a lot and then they walk away once they find a couple good things. And like, I found one of those, all my friends were so pissed. The bins in New Hampshire, the Barbie, the 90s Barbie shirt. It's by
Yeah.
Jerry something. And everyone had
Jerry
picked
Lee.
through.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone picked through and they went back and they were showing off their stuff. And I just walked by and I was like, this looks cool. And they're like, oh my God, that was left there. So I guess I'm good at finding the stuff that everyone passes over. And I wasn't doing super
Cool.
high, like I wasn't super into vintage at that point. It was just like secondhand outdoor clothing. Like why spend $300 on a ski coat when you can get one almost new for 50, $60?
Yeah, just good quality, wearable things that hold their value. So you're traveling the country with your ex partner in the van, which I
Mhm.
find it's such a part of this whole climbing culture, like living out of your van, living minimalist lifestyle. I live in Squamish, so we have like a mass amount of van lifers that come for the summer, but also like live there full time. Um, what are some tips of like if somebody wants to do this, if a listener wants to like get in their van and take off for a year or forever, How was that experience for you, and what are some tips about living out of a van?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely learned a lot as I went, and I would have done a lot of things differently if I did it again. We started in a Subaru WRX hatchback with a teardrop trailer that he had purchased secondhand from a guy who used to like tow it with his motorcycle in Florida. And the third day on the road, we're driving up the mountains by, I think it was Cloudland Canyon Park, and no cell service. And he looks in the rearview mirror, and the wheels are wobbling. And so we pull over, and the axle just snapped in half, completely snapped in half. And
Wow.
we're like, well, this is cool. 3 days into the road trip. And this really nice guy driving up, he had just come from church. He was wearing his church clothes, get down on the ground, looks under it, and then turns out he's a welder. And so he um, kind of like rigged it together, and we followed him back to his house, and he welded it for us and refused to take any money.
Wow.
So
That's so lucky.
yeah, yeah, and he refused to let us help too. We just sat with his like wife and grandma and like drank lemonade while he did all the work. I felt awful, but I guess that's just how they like to treat people there. So that was sort of my first lesson, and like quality is important. We eventually switched from the teardrop to a van because we I think it sort of started by like if the weather was bad, we wanted to be able to cook inside and like comfortably be inside all day. But it was also that as we started going further west, it became a lot harder to find places to sleep for free. And we like rarely ever paid for campsites unless we were at like a national park. And when you drive an old van, ours used to be one for plumbing, so it had like really faded decals. You can actually like end up like staying in neighborhoods and no one really reports you because I think it's just like a commercial van for someone that works in the
Yeah.
area. So the other thing we learned was that everyone tells you Sprinter vans go for like 500,000 miles. So we found one with about 250, maybe 280,000 miles. And we're like, oh, it still has so much life left in it. But our trip was actually supposed to be a year, and we cut it back 3 months because it was just like $800 repair after $800 repair because they can last that long, but it takes a lot of work. And like at one point, we were in the middle of Joshua Tree and it just stopped working. And we had to coast out of the park. I don't even know how we made it. And then, because again, no cell service, we couldn't call for a tow. And we had to live out of Walmart, out of their parking lot for a week while we waited for the part to come in. So it's like, I definitely would have just spent the money on a higher quality vehicle. And I think I would have saved money and stress in the long run.
More time
But
climbing, less time waiting in the Walmart parking lot for your van to be fixed.
yeah, yeah. And then, like, even with the van in most of California, you can't camp for free. You have to stay on like official campgrounds. They don't let you stay in Walmarts.
Really,
And there's
California is the no Walmart rule?
Yeah, I mean, this was a decade ago. It could have come a long way since then.
Oh, it probably got worse, to be honest. But
Yeah, we would like do all this research, drive around, find a 24-hour one because those are the ones that usually don't care. And then people would come and like knock on the door and be like, "You have to get out of here in 20 minutes, or we're calling the cops." So that became very difficult. But then you have like that was more of the in between areas. Once you get to like more established climbing areas, like Bishop, like people live on that BLM land for months while they're out climbing during the season. So you just kind of have to like get from point A to point B, but it's harder to like enjoy cities on rest days and stuff like that.
yeah, I was going to ask that question. Like, where do you end up camping? I lived in a van for a short period of my life in Australia, driving around the country. And I remember getting knocked on by cops in neighborhoods, and they told us to leave, and trying to find places to sleep. And they don't have Walmart there. At least they didn't when I was there. So it was like there wasn't those free places. We ended up having to pay for most of our nights in campgrounds. But I
Yeah,
wouldn't trade
and
that time for the world. It was the best.
every once in a while we paid for campgrounds, and it's not that bad depending on the area. It's like $15 to $50 a night. Like we stay at some cool ones with like hot springs and stuff, but when you're doing that like every night, like our budget for each month, like climbing the most beautiful areas, eating healthy, gas, like everything, our budget was $750 each a month. Um,
Nice.
so like less than most people's like just rent. So if you're paying 20, $30 a night for campsites, that's like almost the entire budget. So
Yeah, for
um,
sure. And I mean,
we
I think it's
tried.
hard to probably find that now. I was just camping for $70 a night with my kids. So, it adds up super fast.
Yeah. But car camping taught me that I will probably never tent camp again. One of the issues I had with my partner was he kept making ramen and then pouring the broth outside of like the car or van we were staying in. And this like there were a couple issues. At one point the dog ate the gravel that the broth was poured on, and he just pooped gravel for a week. It looked really painful, but it passed and he was fine. But
Wow.
another
Okay.
time we woke up and there were two huge bear paw prints on the back of the car. Apparently a bear came to visit us overnight, and I'm sure if we were in a tent that would have not been as safe. So I only car, van, motel, whatever camp now. I don't do tents.
That freaked you out enough to warn you off tents.
I mean, I've always hated tent camping. I'm one of those people who I love the outdoors and I respect wildlife to no end, and I'm also terrified of it. Um, so, like that wilderness program you mentioned earlier, we actually didn't get tents. We had a tarp, and you tied your tarp up to two trees. So you were sort of not exposed, like on top, but like if it rained, the whole thing, you're just sleeping in mud, and like snow still came in and out, especially if it was windy. And someone told me a story when I first got there about a girl who had woken up to coyotes licking her face. And like,
Wow.
I know a coyote is not going to like hurt. They're more scared of you than you are of them. And the only reason was because she was sleeping. But the idea of waking up to a coyote licking my face left me like paralyzed in fear the entire time I was there. So I just like, I prefer to be
Yeah, for sure. They're
indoors
scared
to
of
a
us, but
certain degree.
they're also not. A coyote's not gonna just randomly come up to you for affection, lick your face. It's like there for a reason, or for food. I don't know. That sounds crazy. So rewind to this story. I want to dive into this. On your Instagram, I saw you wrote something um, like "break the silence" or something. It was right. Is
Breaking
is
code
that is
silence. Yeah.
breaking code silence? Is that referring to this, or is that a whole something else?
So, Breaking Code Silence, it's the name of the one of the first not like major nonprofits that has worked with like legislation with shutting the programs down, but also awareness, like giving survivors a voice. It's the first one that Paris Hilton really backed, which is how it like got a lot
Okay.
of popularity. It refers to the troubled teen industry in general, which is a blanket statement of like residential treatment centers, therapeutic boarding schools, but wilderness programs are a huge part of that. The name breaking code silence comes from the fact that one of the most common interventions that we were put under was not being able to talk. So, I mean, we had no communication with the outside world the whole time we were there. I didn't talk to a single one of my friends for 3 years. And all communication with my parents was monitored. So if I got the privilege of a phone call, someone was holding their finger over the hang up button in case I, said something about being unhappy. And if you got in trouble, you could be put on mute. So you just literally couldn't talk for, weeks to months at a time. And then obviously solitary confinement was a huge common consequence for very minute infractions. So the
Wow, that sounds crazy.
yeah, so the idea behind it is like um to not only not silence us, but also like one of the first big things that Breaking Code Silence did was allow survivors to tell their story. Like that's what a lot of the website is survivors telling their stories.
So just like to run some of the listeners don't understand what this is. This is your parents have to sign you up. They basically send you to the school under the pretense that like it's rehabbing you for some purpose or disciplining you for some purpose typically, or like they just maybe they're confused and they think this is a good program. um, I'm not exactly sure, but your parents sign you up. Then I actually had somebody else on the podcast, another female, who also got sent to these schools, and she had some crazy stories. And they come and like physically like remove you from your house and then like take you away. And typically like you don't know you're going until it's like too late. In a lot of cases, and you're just going with them.
Yeah, so the most common way to get sent to one of these programs is being kidnapped in the middle of the night. And they don't tell you because they don't want you to avoid it and like run away. So you wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. to two big guys in your bedroom. And what, if you talk to any survivor who's been through this, including myself, what they say is you can go the easy way or the hard way. And you legitimately think you're being kidnapped because, like, what else would you think it is? And then they have your parents stand in the hallway. And that way you watch your parents watching and you know that they somehow signed off on this. And then they, depending on how belligerent you are, they will like zip tie your hands and they put you in a car, drive you to the airport, and then they can't walk you through the airport with zip ties because that's too obvious. So they tell you that if you, and I went completely willingly because I was a good kid. I avoided trouble. And they told me that if I tried to run or do anything, they would just hog tie me in the middle of the airport. And then you get to usually Utah. I think I actually flew into Vegas though, and then they drive you to Utah. So now they've like transported you across so many state lines. Like it's human trafficking. And then
Is it
yeah,
Utah because like there's certain laws that like
yes.
they're allowed to circumvent there or something? Yeah.
So Utah, Montana, um, very commonly are used. I went to a program in Massachusetts. I don't think it was because the laws were lax. I think it was because they literally never checked on us in the year and a half I was there, so no one knew. There's a few in Maine, but yeah, it's just
So back to your experience, I want to sort of know more like specifically your experience. So at this time, how old were you when you got taken?
I was 15.
And so you're in high school. Do your parents like were you getting in trouble? Were you into drugs? Like what was the catalyst for your parents to like want to send you? Quick intermission to the show, everyone. If you want to continue on past the free 45 minutes that you're going to get here right now, you got to jump on the Patreon and get your free 7-day trial to all the full episodes of the show. There's so many great guests and so many great guests coming up. Click down below for the Patreon, free 7-day trial. After that, it's just $5 per month. And if you don't want to mess with Patreon, they do have an app you can download, so it's easy to get on your phone, listen to in your car, whatever you want. The video and the audio versions will be on there. You can join right here on the YouTube and watch it on the YouTube. So full episodes either way, Patreon or here on YouTube. Go get it. Links in the show notes or click join on YouTube. Thank you guys for tuning in.
So I was actually a professional horseback rider when I was a kid. And my parents had money, but not enough money for that. So I was working full time from when I was a child, in order to get free rides on other people's horses. And then I also was a straight A student. And so I was balancing, like I was on a plane every week, just flying back and forth from horse shows to training, to school, and keeping up my grades and being the best in the country for my age group. And
wow,
eventually I just kind of broke a little bit. And my parents brought me to therapy for the first time. So like a lot of people, they try everything, it doesn't work. And then these programs are the last resort. For me, I went to therapy for 1 month and the therapist said, you can relax. You don't have to be perfect. You can relax. And then I ended up getting a couple C's in school. And the new semester was going to start. And my parents were like, well, we want to jumpstart the next semester. Like, you need to get back to getting A's and at least B's. And they put me on an antidepressant that was known to have very bad side effects for teenagers. And I don't want to use the word hostile because I wasn't violent. I think I threw a stuffed animal at a wall at one point, but I was mostly just really irritable. And instead of giving me time to like detox off of the meds and like return to some sort of normal life, they were just like, if we don't send you away, you're going to die. And so then they sent me away, to use tough love to counteract the depression, which doesn't sound like it makes sense, and it doesn't, but they do it all the time. So
I'm sorry that happened to you. That sounds horrible, and I could not imagine myself I was just thinking about my kids and sending them away, and that's a crazy thought to me. Do you think your parents understood at all what you were about to go through?
So yes and no. In the beginning, it's hard to say in the beginning because it's like, as you're saying with kids, like I could never imagine paying to have my kid kidnapped and dumped in the desert. But like, I think there were a lot of people talking in my parents' ears. Like they hired an ed consultant who said it's just a 6-week program. And then when I was in wilderness, they were like, well, she's not breaking down enough, so you should send her to this 9-month program. And then once I was at the 9-month program, I hadn't received an education in almost a year. So I couldn't go back to normal high school. I wouldn't have graduated on time. So they were like, oh, well, this therapeutic boarding school will guarantee getting her into a good college. So it was kind of like they didn't sign up for the 3 years when they signed the initial paperwork. It just kind of like snowballed from one thing to another. Towards the end, though, they did know. And I learned a lot of that in the last 5 years, which has been a big struggle for me. But we had no access to internet there. I knew nothing about any of the people that had control over my life. And when I found out that there were a lot of allegations around the people that I was, locked alone with every day, I confronted some people on it who said that they all knew, and they thought it was worth the risk. So it's hard to answer.
You're saying that the people you were locked away with, meaning the counselors and stuff?
Oh, yeah, the counselors, yes.
So they knew that what they were doing was completely wrong. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is the counselors hurt students and got arrested for it and took plea deals and continued running the programs. Um, but
Wow.
yes, I think like specifically the guy who ran the last program I was at for almost 2 years, Thomas Bratter, he was a monster who, had sexually assaulted multiple students. But I think he did think he was helping us in some ways. Like he really truly believed in tough love. Um, but I don't know who would think sexually assaulting children is going to help them. So like it's again one of those things that's hard to answer. I'm sure there's a little bit of truth both ways.
Yeah. Um, so now there's a movement that's trying to like get rid of these schools. And I guess what also listening to you talk about this, these are like credited educational facilities. So like you do you get it like do you get to say that you went to school by going to this place?
So that's actually a huge issue right now because I have friends who graduated the programs and were given diplomas and, lived their life as adults as best as they could. And I have one friend I think she's 35, and she just went to apply for new jobs and found out that her high school diploma is fake. It wasn't an accredited school. Another issue is because it's kind of like a catch-22. We're successfully shutting down many of these programs. I got one of my programs shut down, the one that my high school diploma is from. So if I needed transcripts to go back to college, I can't get them because the school no longer exists. So like it's most of our paperwork is very messy. And I was just participating in a lawsuit against one of the programs I was at. And there's literally not a shred of evidence that I ever went there because they can shred records after 7 years. And they said it was because of HIPAA laws. I don't know if that was true, but there's no photos of me being there. My parents said they shredded all their bank statements and emails and stuff like that. So, like, there's just nothing. It's like it never happened.
So there's a lawyer on your defense can't prove that you were ever there, and they're arguing you were not there.
So the other complicated thing is that there's statute of limitations for child abuse and medical neglect and anything you want to sue for that we could have sued for. So I ended up being an informant on that case. And they just used like a very small part of my testimony. There were about 30 informants, I think. And there were only about 7 plaintiffs because basically a really big part of the programs is Stockholm syndrome. And so when you leave and you have Stockholm syndrome and it takes years and years and years to wear off. And by the time it wears off, you're outside of the statute of limitations. You can't do anything about it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a perfect storm. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's crazy. And thank you for being open about this topic. One thing that I wanted to ask before we get off this and move into the world of vintage a little bit more is, about you and your parents. Because I would imagine like that created such an not interesting, such a crazy, potentially not good relationship with your parents for you. Um, do they have any idea how much that affected you obviously now? And like, do they have you reconciled that relationship with your parents, or how did that all play out after the fact?
It's been a lot of ups and downs. I recently started talking to them a little bit over the last like month or two after pretty much going no contact for a year. It's, I think the issue now is that they know how bad what they did was, but to them, protecting their emotions of the shame and guilt they feel is a higher priority to them than giving me the validation and support that I need, which would be difficult for them. So it's, for a while, they were just like in denial about it. And then I think the biggest issue we've had over the last few years is that they don't under, to them, they messed up for 3 years. And then those 3 years were over, and now I'm an adult with adult responsibilities, and I need to take care of my life. And what's really difficult to get across is that that disadvantage in my life has impacted almost my entire life to this day. I ended up in a marriage that was very, very unhealthy, that I tried to leave many, many times and never did. And I never graduated college because I was just such a mess. I mean, think about being in a cult and having no exposure to the outside world, and then suddenly being like, go to college, and like living on campus, being with kids who had like semi-normal high school experiences. It was very difficult, and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life because I had no anonymity for years. And so I kept transferring. It was just it. So I ended up being I spent 4 years in college, but I left with no degree and no real direction, and ended up following a man who didn't treat me very well for almost a decade after that. So the issue that I've had with my parents is that it's not as simple as, oh wow, you really screwed me over those 3 years. It's like I still pay for it every single day of my life today in some capacity.
Yeah, of course. Um, and I think parents. I'm quite aware of it for my children. How like our childhood is very important, and it affects how we show up in the world later on. All these experiences add up, and like you're saying, expecting someone to come out of that and thrown into a normal situation where you're forced not to be social for so long, and then life is social. The real world is social. You need to have uh, the skills to be able to tackle that, and thinking that that is going to fix you and get you ready for the world, when in actuality it's complete opposite. um, yeah. um, it's wild. I Sorry I had to go through that.
Yeah, it's the advocacy work I've done has been incredible for my healing. I did a lot of work like getting articles written, like contributing to that lawsuit. It, like 2 out of 3 of the programs I went to have been shut down, and I actually have an opportunity right now to get my wilderness program shut down as well, which I'm probably gonna contribute to. But what has actually really helped is now that I've started, this is actually inspired by Paris Hilton. I met her in DC while we were doing some work there, and she said that if you have a platform, use it. And obviously, I have like 6,000 followers on Instagram. She has like whatever 200 million. I don't even know followers on TikTok, but like I really took that into account, and I'm like, I don't know what kind of impact I'm going to have, but it's important for me to share my story. And at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, just random people reach out to me on Instagram. Like, hearing your story convinced me to convince my aunt to not send my nephew away, or hearing your story made me like look into other options for my son when he was getting difficult, or my sister went through the same thing and I never understood, but hearing it from you, I can relate to her better. And just hearing that my suffering didn't come in vain, like other people are benefiting from it. makes it seem a lot less, I don't know if I want to say less painful, but like it wasn't all for nothing.
Yeah, I think that's a great attitude. And good for you for doing all that work. I think it is important. So let's switch it back to some vintage, okay? Was there anything else you wanted to say on that topic before we move into something else?
Um, I don't think so. I guess just like if anyone's listening from the perspective of having a teen that they don't know what to do with, um, there are, as I mentioned earlier, there's ed consultants. One of the big problems they're trying to tackle now is all the kickbacks that everyone gets. That's why a lot of people who went to the same programs as me, they went to the same three programs. People like everyone's getting paid from someone to send someone somewhere. So just make sure you do your own research and don't just listen to the person getting paid to kidnap your kid.
Yeah, and when you said that, like that, the timeline, it makes sense because it's a business. They want to make money, and they're trying to push you into the next program to keep you paying them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even if you are potentially rehabbed in their mind, they're going to continue to push you down the line to make more money.
Yep.
So do your research, people. Do your research.
Yes. And listen to survivors.
Okay, so back to climbing, back to this world of vintage. You specialize in outdoor clothing. If you go to Orbital Outdoors, it's just a plethora of amazing Patagonia pieces. All the things you would use for climbing, amazing fleeces. You also have other outdoor brands on there. What is it about Patagonia specifically that you think, like, in my opinion, when you look at the world of outdoor vintage, Patagonia kind of like stands on its own. You have other brands. You have Arc'teryx, you have North Face, you have Mountain Equipment Co-op, you have Eastern Mountain Sports, Mech, whatever. But Patagonia, for vintage fans and collectors, seems to like rise above. Why do you think that? What is it about it that you are drawn to kind of dive into that world?
So I think part of why I originally loved the brand actually now applies to most of the brands. I think they're all kind of picking up on it. But it was started by like their lifetime guarantee. And the fact that I was listening to a podcast yesterday where the founder of Patagonia was talking about how, like, yes, his products are expensive. Like, nothing they sell is cheap, but he wants you to go buy one jacket that you can wear skiing, wear over your suit, walking to work in New York City. Like, he wants you to have like less higher quality things. And then if something happens to it, they'll repair it for free. And that way it's just like keeping products in circulation as opposed to continuously buying new products. I also personally don't like wearing the same stuff all the time. So it's nice that these products hold their value so I can always sell them and buy new ones. Although I definitely have like a capsule collection that doesn't move. But I think that was part of it. I also think that part of it is the fact that like the founder of Patagonia is a like avid outdoorsman himself. And what I found from talking to people who support like my business as opposed to other people that kind of take the same approach as I do into reselling vintage is they're like, I appreciate that you like the outdoors. You have a collection yourself. Like, you're not just doing this for profit. It's actually something that you personally care about. And I actually got some slack for this. When I opened my storefront in Nashville, I was interviewed by the local news. And she's like, I said something about how I don't let anything come into the shop unless it's something that I would personally wear. Like, I want to appreciate everything that I'm selling. And she made it sound like this awful thing. Like, I don't even know, but the way it was worded like really rubbed me the wrong way. And I was like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, my shop is like an extension of my personality. Like, every piece is like well curated, and I definitely try to go a bit out of my comfort zone. But I think it's nice that people can kind of like I have customers that say over half of their wardrobe they bought from me. And so it's just like they find a style they like. My style is pretty consistent, and then I have loyal customers. Um, so yeah, back to Patagonia. I think me, myself, and a lot of people appreciate that the founder, didn't go public. He cared about his products, and also just I started right before COVID, and so when I found out that like all of their workers were just getting paid in full to not work while the store was shut down was just amazing, because so many people were forced on unemployment or laid off or all this stuff. And it just seemed like they care about their products, they care about their people, and they care about the environment. And they just have really cool stuff. Like 90s Patagonia is just so much cooler than like there are some cool like EMS pieces and REI pieces, but I mean Arc'teryx is amazing, but most of their pieces are honestly kind of boring.
It's very
So
hard to distinguish like a 90s art piece from an art piece today. Like it could be mistaken the same thing, whereas Patagonia, you'd be like, no, no, that's obviously a 90s Patty piece versus something that's modern.
yeah, yeah, I do have some Arc'teryx pieces and I love them, and they're great. The only one that's really like interesting that I have is one from their program Rebird. So it's actually upcycled from a bunch of different jackets. So it's a little bit different. But other than that, so many of their pieces are just very consistent, which there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that. It's just not the style I was going for with my business.
Yeah, and something too that listening to you talk about Patagonia that's apparent is when you look at North Face or Arc'teryx, I don't know who founded those companies. Like I couldn't tell you their names, right? Um, but most people could tell you Yvon Chouinard founded Patagonia, which is something to say for sort of transparency and also marketing. It's like marketed in a way that you know what's behind it, the reasons he founded it. He's very public. He's not afraid to like be on an interview or a podcast that you listen to, um, which I think plays into the longevity of these things because people buy into the stories, right? And we don't know the story of Arc'teryx. I couldn't tell you like why it was founded, who founded it. I know that they make great clothing, but I think that's part of why it has the esteem in the vintage world that it does potentially. Okay, that is it for the free 45-minute version. If you want to continue listening, which I highly recommend you should, then you got to jump on the Patreon, get the free 7-day trial on there. So you don't have to pay anything to listen to this episode right here. After that, it's just $5 a month. That's $1.25 per episode. It's crazy cheap, I know. On the extended version of this episode that you will see on the Patreon, we dive into my crazy, insane theory, actually created by my homeboy Will, that Patagonia was founded by drug money. And we talk about that theory and how Will came to that theory. So you want to jump on the Patreon or you want to join here on the YouTube and learn all about it. There's lots more knowledge. We talk so much more about Patagonia, price checking, price guide stuff, cool pieces we've had and sold. And yeah, the conversation continues. As always, if you guys want to get 30% off FSandFrankVintage.com, there's a link down below and there's a code. Check that out. Go shop. There's some Patagonia on there. If you guys are listening and you want to buy some Patagonia, go check out the shop, FSandFrankVintage.com, 30% off. Otherwise, jump on the Patreon and continue listening. and hear lots of more great stories from the Vintage and Stuff podcast. Kelsey, Orbital Outdoors.